Three, two, one, here we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Brian the Rain Man Lucas. Welcome to RAINMAN'S Take, observations on the world we live in. We're going to take a deeper dive into topics of interest to me, including politics, current events, history, popular culture, and social issues. You'll find the diversity of topics refreshing. In our clickbait, soundbite society, we rarely get the whole story. RAINMAN'S Take interviews interesting people as well as peeling back the onion on specific topics, all with the goal of getting people to think more deeply about a subject. I've got a great interview for you today. A good friend of mine, old friend of mine from the Marine Corps days, Dan Sheehan. Dan is a veteran of the Marine Corps, both multiple combat tours, both as a AH-1 whiskey Cobra pilot, as well as a forward air controller with the Marine Special Operations Command back in Iraq in 2004. And then we're going to talk quite a bit about his experiences there. After leaving the Marine Corps, Dan actually flew commercially as well as a contractor, commercial pilot. And following that, he made quite a departure from being an aviator and has become basically an award-winning author. Dan is the author of 2 nonfiction books right now and is currently in the process of writing a fiction novel as well. But I wanted to get Dan on today to talk not only about his experiences both as a combat pilot and also as a Marine on the ground in combat operations, but also, if we have time, hopefully to get to kind of some very important lessons that Dan learned during all that time with PTSD. A lot to get to today. What I want to do is jump right in and introduce Dan Sheehan. Dan, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Brian. How about you?
Good, real good, real good. I think probably let's when we start from the beginning, Dan, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you went to college, kind of how you decided to go into the military, and then from there we'll kind of pick it up from there.
Sure. So I was a Navy brat growing up. My dad did 20 years as a naval pilot, naval aviator. My grandfather was in the Navy, as well as my grandmother during World War II. So kind of have a long history in my family with that. And so I got to grow up all over the place. Spain for 3 years, Bermuda for 3 years, Virginia Beach. And then my folks, when my dad retired, they settled down outside of Philadelphia. And so I got to go to high school there and then off to Penn State for college. And while at Penn State, I did ROTC as well as the platoon leaders class program, and ended up earning my commission in the Marine Corps and was commissioned as second lieutenant in '96, and then flight school after finishing TBS, off to flight school, and was lucky enough to get selected for Cobras at the end of that, which brought me out to Camp Pendleton, where we met, as you were one of the instructors at 303 when I first got there.
Nice. Yeah, and hopefully, as you're talking, I want to ask you a couple of questions, because just kind of going over your what you did while you were over in Iraq. We had overlapping time frames. I was in just west of Fallujah flying Hueys in Al Taqaddum, which is just west of Fallujah. During that time, you were in Baghdad or out of Bayab, and then working kind of that general area. So we definitely have some overlap, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit about that.
Sure.
Let's kind of fast forward a little bit. So you're on active duty in the Marine Corps. You go out on a deployment on a carrier with the Marine Amphibious Ready Group, and then on the way back, as I understand it, that's when you guys basically got reattached to another unit that was getting ready to go overseas. Talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So back before the Iraq invasion, the Marine Corps used to deploy their gunship squadrons. They'd split them into thirds, and they'd take 4 Cobras and 3 Hueys and put them on board the ship, an amphibious ready group like you talked about, and send them out as a Marine Expeditionary Unit from San Diego. And so we would join up with a composite squadron and we'd float out. We'd do 6 months of workups here and then 6 months on the ship overseas. During that 6-month deployment, the other 2/3 of the squadron would deploy to Okinawa, and 1/3 of them would stay on the rock for 6 months, and then the other third would deploy on the 31st MEU and do an abbreviated tour out there. So I was part of the SoCal MEU from Scarface, HMLA 367. We were on the, that was the Bella Wood. And we deployed, we did 6 months, bunch of time in Djibouti and bouncing around the Middle East, but no real combat tours during that period. This was just during I would say this was the yellow cake phase of the build up to war. And as we were coming home in December of 2002, the drumbeat was getting louder and louder, and our ships were coming home. We were at the end of our deployment. There was another MEU getting ready to leave San Diego to go out to sea. And quite honestly, I thought that we were going to miss the show. I thought that the war was going to start, and nobody knew how long it was going to be, but you didn't want to, if you're a gunship pilot in the Marine Corps, you want to be wherever something is happening. And we came back from our 6-month deployment, flew off the ship and landed back at Camp Pendleton. And I think BT Miller, I don't even know if he went home after we first landed that day. I think he probably went straight over to Woodman, to 267, and talked to the CO there, Colonel Haywood, and said, "Listen, we're ready to go.
Yeah,
take us with you, basically." And that was the time when we all knew that it was going to happen, or we expected that it was going to happen.
Right.
And you get the feeling that something big is happening when the Marine Corps opens up all the spare parts inventories, and transmissions just appear in the squadron, and new engines pop up, and you got a gripe on a gun, it gets fixed, and the parts they come from anywhere, and they come from everywhere. Well, the same thing happened with people, and our small detachment of 4 Cobras and 3 Hueys was a tight-knit group that had been flying together for over a year. And Colonel Haywood pulled us into HMLA 267. And 3 weeks after we got off the ship, we were back on the ship, on a different ship with the Amphibious Task Group ATF West, floating back over to Kuwait. It took us, there was no stopping, except for the one night when the Dubuque's boilers took a crap. I think we went dead in the water for a couple hours.
Yeah.
But we got moving again, and less than 30 days at sea, we were back flying off into Kuwait, and we immediately went to Ali Al Salam Air Base in Kuwait, and dropped our sea bags and started planning.
Amazing. Now, when I was doing some show prep here, you'd also mentioned just a quick snippet about some action in East Timor prior to Iraq. What was that? And how long before you went over to Iraq? How long ago was that?
Sure. So on both, I ended up doing 2 Westpac MEUs before OIF-1 started. So that was actually my first, when I went to East Timor on both deployments. The ship stopped by, and we did, on my first MEU in 2000, it was 2000. Our ship pulled up, and we did 3 days of operations, helping to transport our assault helicopters. Did a bunch of externals and lifted stuff from the port of Dili up into the outlying mountainsides to help rebuild. This is after the East Timorese voted for independence, and then the Indonesian West Timorese militias came across the border and just murdered a whole bunch of folks and destroyed a bunch of the towns. Really ugly time. But we were able to do 3 days of humanitarian assistance operations there. And as a gunship pilot, we were doing escort for the frogs and the 53s as they carried the heavy lift stuff up into the mountains. And the event that really stayed with me about that, and the reason why I included it in my book After Action, was an event on the last day of that 3-day operation. And we didn't get engaged that entire time. Our threat were militias that might be in the jungle, right, trying to get close to the zones and take pot shots at us. And there was an event that happened on, the last play of the fourth quarter. The time's ticking down. We're literally flying back. We're about to fly back to the ship, and our next stop is Darwin. We're leaving, and we flash over. Kid Manny was my signer, so he was signing for the aircraft, and he was in the back seat, and I was in the front, behind the TSU, and we flash over top of a high ridge line. Just look down the side, get a look down the road in between these tall strips of tall trees on either side. And there's 2 guys in the middle of the street. One of them's got something sticking up over his shoulder. Yeah. And, we're probably 100 knots flashing over the trees. And in my mind, that's an RPG. And so I called it out as a possible weapon. We take tack lead of the section, and we spin back around and come in on the long axis of the road. And Kid gives me the master arm, and he goes, "Shoo, if you got weapons, you engage with the 20 and I'll follow with the rockets." And now Dash 2 is on the backside of us going, "Roger, we're ready, go for it." And we dove in on these 2 guys, and I don't have to tell you how shoddy the sights can be sometimes, but when you're bouncing around, the sights are bouncing like this, and we're now at 100% torque diving in on these guys, and it's shuddering like a son of a gun. I can't tell what this guy has over his shoulder, but I can see him reach up and pull it around. And then the second guy takes a knee beside him and puts something up next to his face. Yeah. And I'm first tour, 3 months or 3 weeks out of leaving San Diego. I'm like, holy shit, I'm about to get into a gunfight. So, and I got the master arms on, I got the gun already slewed to my crosshairs, and I'm just waiting for something to happen, and something to clarify, and something for me to go, that's definitely a weapon, and open fire. And the guy on his knee, something flashes in front of his face. I flip up the trigger guard and start to go, and things settle down just enough as we get close for me to see that the guy on his knee is taking a picture with a camera, and the other guy is playing guitar. The other guy had a guitar behind his back, and now he's strumming it. Wow. And I was like, abort, abort, abort. Everything's safe. We fly away. And that was the closest I've ever come to murdering someone, I think, that didn't deserve it at all. But that was kind of the reason why I'm involved, or why I include that in the book, is just that it was a precursor. I didn't know it at the time, obviously, but it was a precursor of things to come, about how I would have to make that decision in the future and how the results would be different.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, unbelievable restraint, professionalism, because as you know, in the mid 90s, relatively peaceful world, especially for the Fleet Marine Corps. You hear every once in a while, you'd hear about maybe an East Coast jet gets in a little bit of a scuffle somewhere, and because it was a relatively peaceful world, every time something small like that happened, everyone thought that was amazing. They get somebody out there pulling the trigger, and a lot of guys would have gone through most of their career, in the 90s, and not having experienced anything like that. And anybody who's ever been in the military will tell you that that's probably the worst feeling, because as professional soldiers, we're training ourselves to do those things, and if you never get the opportunity to, as sick as that sounds, it's kind of unfulfilling. So and especially about what we're about to talk to, and you having that story and then going into what you're about to go into, truly amazing. So let's flash forward. You hop on with 267, you push over to Kuwait, you start planning, and then day comes and you guys head over the berm. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so our squadron got tasked with taking out the Iraqi border posts along the western section of the border in preparation for the ground invasion to kick off. We planned it out for, I think it was, got the warning order. We had that for about a week. We did rock drills. We did a massive brief. It was a giant period of mission prep with the entire MAG and all the coalition partners, everybody walking. It was amazing to see the level of prep that went into the opening phases. And we did a lot of training missions around Kuwait at that time, just flying and keeping the aircraft operational. If you don't fly something, it breaks. So you got to get them out there and keep the oil moving. And you would just fly over just in vast desert encampments of artillery, of Jordanian tanks and Kuwaitis and US, and then ours. Everybody was out in the desert, and it was just a massive buildup. It was amazing to fly around this, and it was so I remember seeing just the desert covered in troops and encampments, and then we go back and we start getting ourselves ready, do the mission planning, mission prep, and we're still waiting for the execution order. Our squadron was broken down into 5 divisions, one tasked with each of these 5 OPs that we were going to take out. So I was in a 3-ship light division with 2 Cobras and 1 Huey. And we did our full mission rehearsal, flew close to the border, and then turned around. Actually, no, I guess we didn't get that close to the border, but got back and we were ready as we could be. And then we got
Let me backtrack real quick before you kick off. So at this point, you come back home for what seems like a couple days, and then you're turn right back around. At this point, were you married? Did you have kids at that point, or you just a single guy at this point?
No, single guy. I had a girlfriend who was she's a 53 pilot. She's now my wife and mother of our 2 kids.
Okay.
But she was a 53 pilot, and she was over in Okinawa on UDP with the rest of my squadron before we got separated into the debt.
Gotcha. Okay. So it wasn't like you went home, were able to hang out with your family or your girlfriend, and before you had to turn right back around. It was you were kind of in that mindset pretty much that whole time, getting ready to go back.
Yeah. We were just, this was the game in town. Yep. So that was it.
Okay. Cool. And then
I think actually Lena she was able to fly back from Okinawa she was able to get back from Okinawa for leave. And so I did get to see her. And then so I got to see her for maybe a week in between deployments, and then she and her parents were here to see me off when we got on board the Dubuque and sailed out. They got up on Point Loma and watched us sail off. And then she went back to Okinawa for another 7 or 8 months. I forget how many.
Wow. That's funny. I was probably maybe a short distance away from her right there on the waterfront watching you guys leave. Obviously, you and I have got several mutual friends, but Smitty being one of them. I had hung out with him a couple of days before you guys left, and so I went down to watch you guys leave. And at the time, I was actually out of active duty and in the reserves. And so that was like March of 2003 when you guys left?
January.
Okay. And then that following January is when my reserve squadron got activated. So January of 2004. So, but I do remember today vividly watching you guys leave San Diego.
That was a wild feeling, a really strange feeling. to be on board ship, going out through San Diego Bay, and just watching Point Loma kind of disappear over the horizon. It was like, this is getting real.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about real. So generally in the peacetime Marine Corps, in terms of training, especially pilots, weather was definitely, you err kind of on the side of conservative in terms of flying into bad weather during regular training missions. That was obviously not the case when you were over there. Once you guys were heading up into Baghdad, towards Baghdad, that desert threw some gnarly weather at you, I'm sure. You talk
It did.
And that stuff.
It was that. I mean, the environment was the most lethal thing that we faced up there. Honestly, I mean, we took a lot of battle damage from small arms, but it was the environment that killed a fair amount of guys, actually, especially in the opening phases. I mean, when we got the word when we were prepped and ready to go from Kuwait to do our assault, to do the attack across the berm, and we were told, I think the TOT was set for 2200. So 10 o'clock that night we were supposed to go, and so we were just hanging out at the squadron, hanging out in our tents, trying to relax, waiting for the mission time to come around, and the alarm started going off. The alarm read. There were some booms in the distance. Previously that afternoon, our squadron CO had scrambled his division to go help spot for Camp Blue Diamond some Scuds that had come inbound there. But the word came down as kind of the second or third round of Scuds were fired at us that day. The word came down to just go. There was no longer a TOT. It was a scramble, and the squadron just exploded. It was our tents were probably about a mile, 3/4 of a mile from the flight line, from the aircraft, and it was just, everything was in our birds. We had all we had on us were our weapons and gas masks, and so it was just a sprint to the aircraft, get in, get it started, and it was a race. All the aircraft were parked on the perimeter of the taxiway. We had every man on deck, all the ordnance Marines on deck to arm everyone as quick as possible. We got spun up, and it was just divisions launching every which way to get out to their sites. And there was no TOT, there was no coordination beyond your own flight. And so the three of us took off. Weasel and Ike in lead, me and Gash in Dash 2, and Willow and I think Humpy were in the Huey. And so we took off and scrambled and got everything going. It was just, I mean, talk about spinning. I mean, my brain was just going off. This was everything. This was, I had 1,200 hours in the Cobra, and this was it. We're starting an invasion. We're kicking this fight off. And I was able to kind of, there's a moment there where we're arming the bird, and I write about this, where our ordnance Marines come up, and in a gunship, you have to make sure that nothing goes off while the ordnance Marines are arming you. And so you can kill them if you touch the wrong switch. So you have to sit there in the cockpit with your hands up so the ordnance crew can see what you're doing. And then the team leader from the ordnance crew stands outside, and he's watching, and he's directing his guys in, or she's directing her gals in, whoever's running the show, directing the Marines in. They're sliding underneath the 20 millimeter, attaching the firing connectors. They're going back to your rocket pods. They're slamming all the pins, pulling the pins, arming the jettisons, and then they're out of the way. And we're sitting there, and I'm just like, come on. I'm just waiting for that Marine to get his Marines out of the way so I can get going. And at the end of it, he clears his Marines out. He counts them. He shows me how many pins he's got. And then he just stands there, and he just pops up the most parade deck salute you could see. Yeah. And that was that. It was like that moment. I was like, oh, yeah, we do this. This is just what we do.
Yeah.
and returned his salute, and I got back down to work, and then things kind of settled in after that.
Yeah.
But funny how it takes a small gesture like that to kind of
Yeah.
reel you in and go, listen, just
Yeah.
do your job. You've done this.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
only difference is
Yeah, and that brings up a good point, because a lot of civilians that I've talked to, and I'm sure you have as well, especially with the stuff you've done afterwards in speaking with large groups. The one biggest question is, how were you feeling? Were you scared? Were you, what were you feeling like when you first when you first realized that this is it, this is my first mission going into actual combat? I always said it felt like before a sporting event, where you're a little bit nervous, kind of thinking about everything, but as soon as that whistle goes off, it is all business. That's basically what you're saying.
Yeah. That was it as well. That was my dark times were after missions.
Yeah.
And when I was thinking about all the things that could have gone wrong but didn't. Yeah. And then I'm imagining what can go wrong in the next mission. And those were the longer you stay in that rotation, the more those thoughts escape the dark moments, and they start to permeate every moment. And so at the beginning, the newness of it all provides that adrenaline to force it down and to push it away and just go, I'm just doing this. I'm not thinking about it. I'm just doing it. And the more, I won't say blasé, but the more used to it you get, the less protected I was anyhow from those thoughts, and they started coming in at more inopportune times.
Yeah. And you talk about that, and that was one major reasons why you wrote the Continue Actions, and we're definitely going to get to that. But it's that whole concept of compartmentalization. And if you do that long enough and with enough stuff, eventually you can't compartmentalize it all, and it's gonna start to kind of bubble back up. And especially like with you, this would be something that I'd be fascinated to hear about. And that is, that I don't remember exactly what it was. It was 3 or 4 weeks, the initial push into Baghdad, something along those lines. So you guys were in combat for 18 hours a day for 3 weeks straight. And then you come back home, and then you go back as part of an infantry unit, and you're doing it again, just on a completely different level and completely different scale. And so how hard was it to do that, to come back from one mission, take a breather, start to think about it, but then have to ramp yourself back up to go back out again? That's
definitely the experience between my two tours was notably different. And it took me a while, and it wasn't really until I started writing that started trying to pull apart those two different experiences and understand why they affected me differently.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I did that that I started to understand just how different those two combat tours were and how differently they affected me. In the aircraft, and the way I kind of break it down is, one was on the ground, one was in the aircraft. One was as a pilot, one was as a forward air controller.
Yeah.
And my time in the cockpit, in hindsight, I have never been that exposed and that isolated in my entire life. As Gash is my co-pilot throughout that entire time, is still one of my best friends, my best friend. And, he's in the cockpit behind me, but he's 5 feet away, separated by a big instrument panel.
Yeah.
There's no way he can get to me. There's no way I can get to him. If one of us took a round and we couldn't plug it ourselves, we're going to bleed out.
Yep.
There's no corpsman anywhere near us.
Yeah.
There's no dock. Unless we were close to a friendly unit, we could land and get somebody to help out whoever was shot. It provided only one of us was.
Yeah.
We were going to bleed out in that cockpit.
Yeah.
And we were operating at 50 feet and below for the vast majority of our time, because the threat was such that if we flew any higher, we'd get cut in half by a ZU-23, or we'd take radar. And if we got hit by anything radar guided, that was just going to bring us down. We could accept a certain amount of 7.62, and everybody in Iraq has at least one, if not more, AKs. And, we took rounds a lot. Sometimes we never even knew where they came from. But we were flying for, our longest mission was almost 19 hours, 50 feet and below, over top of areas which were still held by enemy forces. There was, as you remember, with the rush to Baghdad, the forward line of troops was generally 2 lanes wide on the highway.
Yep.
Anything off the highway was Indian land, Indian territory. And we flew off the highway all the time because that was the only way to be unpredictable flying along the routes. And we were worried about taking a barrage of artillery. That was the phase of fighting that we were in, where they were still firing giant artillery barrages in various places. And if there's a road area that is an intersection and they see aircraft flying through there a couple of times, target that.
Yep.
You drop a bunch of high explosives on a bird flying 50 feet above the ground, you're going to take them down. Yeah. So we had to fly over the ground. We had to fly over unprotected territory and unsecured area. But to get back to your original question, the second tour, the tempo was much lower, and for the vast majority of that tour, we controlled the tempo of operations. So we would develop, and I was with a special unit that was the precursor for MARSOC. So we were Marine Corps Special Operations Command Detachment 1, and we deployed as a task unit underneath a SEAL commander and worked for the Naval Special Warfare Task Group out of Baghdad. Most of our missions were direct action missions against high-value targets, bomb makers, kidnappers, and the like, in and around Baghdad. And so we would build a target deck, and we would find these insurgents, and we would build up our intel on them. We had a really great team of human intelligence guys, and we pulled all sorts of different fusion intel to create our target packages. And then we isolated them. We figured out when the best time to hit them was, watched patterns of life, and then we would sweep in about a 50-man unit in the dead of night, blow open the door. Generally speaking, on most of these assaults, the guy was zip tied before he really knew what was going on. Yeah. And that's how we operated. We controlled all the variables that we could control. And I never felt as exposed on the ground as I did in the aircraft. I was one of 50 on the ground with some amazing SARCs. The corpsmen that we had were these guys are trauma surgeons. Yeah. So, I mean, if I didn't take one between the running lights, they were going to keep me alive. So it felt really good to be with them. And it wasn't until I started pulling those experiences apart well after the fact that I realized just how exposed we were on that first tour.
Yeah. And if anybody's ever, probably starting from 10 years ago and before, anybody's ever spent any time on the beach in California, the Cobras are not quiet airplanes. So you can hear them coming. You can hear them coming miles away, and it doesn't matter how low they are. You know which direction they're coming from because it is loud. So that just adds, I'm sure, to that sense of being exposed.
Yeah,
easy.
Yeah, we're not sneaking up on anybody.
Exactly. But when you show up, you're ready for a big fight, which is good. I'll just throw in one little anecdote from my experience, and then I want to talk a little bit more about the time frame between your first deployment as the pilot and then going back over on the ground. But just what you were saying about being completely exposed, that's exactly what happened. The one fatality that we had in my squadron was in 2004, Cobra pilot Dave Green, Rhino, and he was in the back seat, and his co-pilot was up front, they took a round, basically a row of rounds right across, knocked out one of the engines, hits Dave in the neck. And we were in Ramadi, which is with full pitch is like a 5-minute flight back to TQ. I mean, we were that close, and he bled out by the time we got back there. So you're basically flying around in a big fishbowl in that Cobra. So all right, so let's talk a little bit more about what was did you have much time to decompress after the initial invasion before you got on a bird and headed right back over with that ground unit?
We had about end of May of 2003, we rotated out. The squadron I was with was slated to go over to Okinawa, so they pulled them out of Kuwait, pulled us all out of Kuwait on a commercial bird. We left our aircraft there in Kuwait. Yeah. And we flew back on a commercial charter plane, got back stateside, and then we separated from our squadron. We separated from 267 and waited for our squadron to get back. Talking about downtime, no. As soon as we got back, we ended up doing. I had been prepped for my NSI check, and so shortly after we got back from Iraq, my squadron got back. We did the NSI stuff, and I got my NSI cert. That was, I think, my last flight in the squadron was getting my NSI cert. And then after that, I was due for orders and had been lucky enough to get them to be one of the forward air controllers with the SOCOM detachment. Yeah. And so that was in August. So about 3 months, about a month and a half after we got back from the first combat tour, I joined the SOCOM detachment as the second forward air controller. Tommy Dolan, Hobbit, who I'm sure you know, he pulled me in there and was influential in making that as good of a tour as it was for me. He did a lot of he shielded me a lot from the let's say the planning and the staff stuff that young officers usually get tasked with in units like that. And his instructions for me, he was my boss, his instructions to me were, you're not supposed to be here in the office. You're supposed to be out with the guys. And so we started up, the SOCOM detachment started up and had a very accelerated workup period. And we were unique in that we were formed by, it was about an 86-man detachment. I think we swelled to a little over 100 by the time we deployed. But it was about 86 men from Force Recon, from Human Intelligence, we had 3 or 4 old Anglico guys and fires guys, staffers, and then the S4 to bring that together. Yeah. And so we operated as a mini MAGTF without any air assets, I guess is the best way to describe it. But we were built around a 50-man shooter platoon with the assorted groups that would need to go with them for various types of operations, whether they were Afghanistan or Iraq. We didn't know initially off the bat which one we were going to go to, so we prepped for both. As we got further in and we got further into the workup cycle, after we did 3 weeks of operations up in Bridgeport, yomping through the mountains up there. We did workups out at Mercury, Nevada, up in the desert there. We did some urban work up by Victorville, basically just integrating with the SEAL teams and the SEAL team that we're going to deploy with and getting ready to go. So that was 9 months from the time the flag went up the flagpole and we had a unit to the time we were sitting on the ramp waiting for C-17 to pick us up down at North Island, to fly us into Bayap. That was it. So no, not a whole lot of downtime, but I didn't want any downtime either. That's that was that weird period where I came home off of this first combat tour and was just, I was up. I was on. This was it. We were just in it.
Yep.
And I got home, and it was okay, straight to leave. Flew back to the East Coast and saw my friends and family. Commissioned my younger brother, who was just graduating from North Carolina State, and got commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Marine Corps. And I got to read him the oath, and it was, it just felt really good. And it was, everything was exciting. Everything was moved to the next thing. It was a party. It was, hey, we're having a cookout. We're having a welcome home. We're having a this, having a that. And it, there wasn't a whole lot of, no, I'm just going to sit around and think about this. No, that wasn't what happened. And I remember my aunt at one point, I think it was my aunt, just saying, hey, when you're ready, I want to hear about it when you're ready. And that was about it. And that was kind of the first thing that, and my family with their military background, I knew that they would understand. And I openly, I talked to my dad. He's a Vietnam vet. He knows, and our aircraft, even though he was flying OB-10s and I was flying Cobras, our missions were pretty similar.
Yeah.
And the weapons we were engaged with and engaged by were all the same, or very similar.
Yeah.
And so we had a lot of common ground to discuss. But even those discussions at that point, I was only able to kind of give like an intel debrief, who, what, where, and when, and what we did, but never able to assign emotions to those events. Yeah. And to say, wow, other than it, that sucked, or that was really cool, those sorts of broad brush things. That was as far as I could go, because I didn't have any words to describe a lot of the emotions that I had.
Yeah.
And I didn't put any value on finding them and pulling those things out.
Yeah. Well,
and so from that standpoint, it was healthy for me to get orders to the det and to have, and instead of worrying about an aircraft, now I had to learn a whole bunch of different other skills. I had to learn the ground side of things, the radios, the CQB, the different weapon systems, the different tactics, and how to learn how to be assigned and as a FAC with a small team. And I'm a pilot. I'm not a recon guy, but I'm going to be out running around with these guys, and I need to be able to not be I can't be a liability to them. Yeah. So I better be able to keep up and shut up until it's time for me to do my job, and then I better be on time, on target.
Yeah.
So it was really good for me to be able to focus on that during that 9-month period, and then go back into combat, because once you're there, you don't worry about anything other than the next mission, the next day, the next thing that you need to focus on. There's no, gosh, I wonder, am I really going to do 20 full years in the Marine Corps? Or, I wonder if I should do this in 15 years. No, you don't worry about anything beyond the next day. It's that far. And it's not that it's so dangerous that you are constantly going, I'm not going to live till tomorrow, but you're just like, why am I going to waste time thinking about stuff that far out in advance? No, I got alligators closer to the boat than that. So.
Yep. Now, when you went over there, were you guys on at BIOP, or where were you housed?
So we were housed at Radwania Palace Complex down in the corner of BIOP. It was an old palace complex of Saddam's, and I think Fifth Special Forces Group had their headquarters there. Okay. And we took over it was a really weird place. There was a palace up on a hill overlooking the waterways and everything else, but there was like a zoo there. There was all sorts of orchards. We lived in the servants' houses over on one side, but it was just a strange area. But we were surrounded by, I think we had probably 10-foot walls all around it, and we had a group of Iraqis that were maintaining our local security, and we got in there. bust over from BIAP, and then once we were in, we were conducting our operations down Route Irish. As most folks who have been there during that time frame know, Irish, and into Baghdad and the Green Zone, and conducted our DA missions, direct action missions, in that area of operations for 6 months.
And that was there was also at that time a lot of, or I guess I should ask you, at that time were there a lot of like contractor groups that were operating that same area as well? Because isn't that not really? Okay.
No, we didn't have. I didn't see very many contractors there. This was before the contractors really got in deep, I think. Gotcha. Now we were there when the four Fallujah, the four contractors were the Blackwater contractors were strung up in Fallujah. Yeah. And we definitely saw contractors, saw strange convoys when we were out. And when we were in the Green Zone, you would see all sorts of. Green Zone was like, it was a strange place where there were all sorts of weird animals walking around there, and you just kind of did your thing. You had your badge, and you went around, and you didn't know where people came from and what they did, but you did your business and got out of there as quick as you could, at least for us. Yeah. There was a short period in which we got tasked with providing personal security detachment for one of the interim vice presidents of the new Iraqi government, and that was 3 days of really uncomfortable operations, because you're a bodyguard for someone who everybody and a lot of folks wanted to kill, and that was not a job that I enjoyed at all. And we were eventually pulled off of that detail because, by virtue of the fact that we were supposed to be there doing a proof of concept for Marines operating under SOCOM, and nobody cared if you could do PSD. They wanted to know what we could do to take down high-value targets out in town. So we got pulled off of that, and unfortunately, that mission got passed off to, or fortunately for us, unfortunately for them, got passed off to another one of the SEAL task units, and they had to come in and take that, protecting that asset for us while we went back to work.
I just remember flying into the Green Zone there. There's that big parking lot right behind the main palace there, and you fly short final right over the big pool area and the big gorgeous building. I mean, it was crazy, bizarre. Yeah. And then we also did one. I think it was a silly VIP type of mission where we had to pick them up at BIAP, and we were waiting for them at one of Saddam's private terminals. And you walk into this place, and it's like gilded walls and beautiful domes, and it was a weird area, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And so, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like the most intense time when you were over there with the Special Operations Command was that the fighting that was going on in Najaf. Was that kind of the I'm not gonna say highlight, but was that like the most intense period of time for that particular department?
That was for us, yes. Yeah. And now we did have our unit did get separated out into various places, and we had several of our Marines got in a sustained firefight at Haifa Street, I believe, in downtown Baghdad, and several of them got fragged during the engagement. Several of them earned Bronze Stars for their heroism on the rooftops, but I wasn't part of that small group that was out. We operated very frequently. We operated in small groups out and about in various places, and I was towards I guess it was in August of 2004. I was attached as the forward air controller with two of my Marines to go out to Al-Qut first. We went out to Al-Qut and helped resupply and support, reinforce an ODA, Operational Detachment Alpha, Green Berets, from their safe house, because the Polish brigade that was the coalition force in the area weren't coming out of their compound. They were inside the base. The ODA had a safe house out on the perimeter of the city, and the Mahdi army was going to town. And it was a big fight out in the city, and the ODA had been hit the day prior by an IED and suffered several wounded, but they were down a little bit. So we flew out there with, I think we had 16 Marines to support them. Flew in the dead of night. They picked us up. We went into their safe house, and we spent a little fuzzy, I think, a little over a week helping them out with their plans to. They were prepping the battlefield for a striker brigade to come in and retake the city of Al-Qud. And so we stayed with them and helped do the planning and do the battlefield shaping with AC-130 gunships and our sniper teams working at night, and helped to shape that battlefield. When the striker brigade came in, they took the town pretty quickly and stabilized it, and we pulled out, I think the day after that, back to Bayap, and then swapped out gear, got new batteries, new ammo, fresh ammo, and then went out to Najaf, because we already had a group of probably 16-ish Marines already there working in Najaf, and they'd been engaged for 10 days, I believe, in constant sniping and constant nighttime forward air controlling from various hide sites in and around the southern part of Najaf. We got there to reinforce them and bring some fresh bodies into the fight, and we ended up, it was a weird. There's no standard way to get into any of this stuff. So we flew in to a small base, hopped off the birds, got a quick brief, and dropped off whatever kit we didn't need, and stripped down to just combat gear. And then we were in the back of the 117s, or 113s, the APCs, the Vietnam era tracked APCs. Hopped in the back of those tin cans, and they drove us through the center of, or drove us from that little compound up to the back of this schoolhouse. We were right just to the south of Ring Road. So if you remember the big mosque, the Imam Ali Mosque, was in the center of Najaf. There was a ring road surrounding that, and we were in a small schoolhouse just on that ring road, just on the south of it. And we ran out of the back of the track, ran up into the third floor, and spent we were in that building for about a week doing, kind of constant counter sniper ops. Guys downstairs providing local security, and then from the upstairs elements, shooting through doors, shooting through loopholes that they cut in the walls. It was quite a counter sniper fight, and most of the action during the daytime, for sure, was our sniper teams engaging the Mahdi army snipers, and they took a toll. And we had some. This was a time when we just had some of the newer suppressed sniper weapons, and they were very effective. They were able to take out a lot of folks who never saw the round coming, and some guy pops out in the street, he goes down, next guy looks out, where the hell did that come from? And he's done too. And so our snipers did a lot of work there. And at night, my team and I did the forward air controlling with the AC-130 gunships. We had rotary wing during the day. Like I had Dave Blassingame come in and do some work for me once. And, over time, you run around with guys afterwards, and you go, oh yeah, I was here, I was there, what was your call sign? And we start to put things together like, holy shit, you shot for me. And so we had a lot of those sorts of events, but it was busy. And that was definitely a two-way fight. You didn't stay exposed behind, you didn't go through, didn't walk past a window.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was coming in both ways. So.
Yeah. All right. So again, folks, that book is called After Action, DanSheehanAuthor.com. So basically that first book kind of obviously got the ball rolling, got you to start to kind of work through your everything that was going on in your head from your experiences in war. So real quick, was what I'd like to do is I'd like to have a second interview where we can actually really go into your next book, your second book, which is called Continuing Actions. That is also available on Amazon. But just real quick before we sign off for today, Dan, tell me a little bit about why you wrote this one and kind of what the motivation was, because at least it seems like to me you probably had a lot of people who were glad you wrote the first one and probably really glad you wrote the second one. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, thanks. The second book came about because after writing After Action, I realized just how lucky I was to have had the support that I had to make it through my own personal journey coming home, and how a lot of folks don't have that luxury and may not have had the support, or may not have just had the lucky interactions that I had with folks in my life that allowed me to have the mental and emotional space to deal with this stuff and to unpack it on my own time.
Yeah.
And I recognized that just how much of a factor that luck was. And I realized that that's not okay. That shouldn't be the deciding factor between who comes home from a combat tour and moves on with their life empowered and strengthened by their experiences, and who comes home from their combat tours and lives the rest of their lives in a shadow of their own self. And that shouldn't be that shouldn't be left to chance. That shouldn't be luck that decides that. And so that was the impetus for writing Continuing Actions, because the more I went through my own experience, the more I realized that I was extremely well prepared to go into combat, but woefully unprepared to come out. And my experience was not unique in that manner at all. And the more I researched it, the more I got into learning about the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell's work about the heroic monomyth, that it very closely mirrors the modern warrior's journey. And we are, as modern military men and women, we are prepared for the first two segments of that journey. We're really prepared to go into war, and we're really prepared to do what we need to do in combat. But there's a whole final third of that trip that's called the return. And we're not even told to expect there's any challenges to coming home, let alone how to deal with them.
Yeah.
So that drove me to write my second book, Continuing Actions, and that is a guidebook for veterans coming home. It explains the emotional, physical, and mental challenges that are inherent to any journey ending, and especially a journey which has such a strong ability to change you internally. You really have to understand how to come back from that and develop your new normal on the backside.
Yeah.
And what I use to tie that into the training that we already receive for physical injuries, we all get trained to do self-aid, buddy aid, and corpsman aid. So self-aid, you get a blister, take care of it, clean your socks, keep going. Buddy aid, you get a bullet through your calf. Hey, get a bandage from your buddy, put that on, have him help you over to the aid station.
Yeah.
You got a sucking chest wound, somebody better get the doc for you real quick.
Yeah.
So self-aid, buddy aid, corpsman aid, we get taught how to deal with that for physical injuries and physical wounds. And that's really effective because you don't have that many docs in a battalion to be able to treat everybody's minor stuff. You got to save the docs for the big stuff. Well, same thing is true with the emotional and mental injuries, the invisible injuries of war. There's a triage system that you can use. You can conduct your own self-aid, your own buddy aid, and then you need to know when the time is right to seek corpsman aid. Yeah. And that's just a basic triage that allows you to more effectively manage your own navigation through the challenges of coming home. So that's the gist of my second book, is explaining these challenges, explaining how we're ill prepared to face them, and then providing pragmatic suggestions for how to deal with it. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm a guy who's lived inside his own brain for a while, digging through this stuff, and figured out some things that really helped me. I was, with that caveat, I approached Dr. Jonathan Shea, the best-selling author of Achilles in Vietnam and Odysseus in America. And he is a renowned psychiatrist who's been dealing with veterans with PTSD for his entire career. Yeah. And he was extremely gracious and wrote the foreword for Continuing Actions.
Right.
And I'm indebted to him for his support and for the cachet that his name lends to my layman's understanding of psychiatry and psychology and the warrior's journey.
All right, man. Well, listen, I think this is probably a good place to stop, because I definitely want to get into Continuing Actions on our next podcast. And what we'll do is we'll have that out next week. So it'll be one right after the other, and hopefully we can continue this conversation. I will just say a couple of things that you didn't necessarily mention, but I'm sure it can work. And that is, anybody who's had a traumatic event in their life, whether they are in the military or in the first responders or just a regular civilian. Those three things that you talk about, probably anybody can use them, right? And
Absolutely.
I think that this book, even though it is based on a warrior's experience, probably has some relevancy to somebody who's going through that. So highly recommend both these books, After Action and Continuing Actions, DanSheehanAuthor.com. And obviously, this was a heavy episode. And I think if anybody's listening and really feels uncomfortable, then, especially if you are a veteran, the VA has come a long way towards helping out, and we kind of just mentioned it briefly before. But if you can't wait for the book, there's always a phone call to make. So I cannot wait to talk to you more about this, Dan. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for your
honesty. Can I interrupt for 1 sec?
Absolutely.
On that note, I did seek and receive counseling from the veteran centers, from a vet center here in the San Diego County, okay. and had a very, very good experience with them. So if any of your listeners are in that stage where they would like to talk to somebody, I highly recommend picking up that phone. Call the vet centers. There are over 300 of them around the state, around the nation, and there's one close by. There are also crisis lines. But if you're not in crisis and you just want to have a conversation, get in touch with the vet center and start the conversation there. You can pick up the book later, start the conversation.
Got it. Good stuff, Dan. Again, thank you very much. I look forward to next week. And I'll just close out the podcast saying, if you are in the military or the police or the first responders, thank you very much for everything you do out there. I really appreciate it. Stay safe, especially in today's environment. Dan, war hero, great author, and just an overall great guy. Really appreciate your time and looking forward to next week.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Take care, everyone. This is Brian the Rain Man Lucas signing off. Thanks for watching Rain Man's Take, Observations on the World We Live in. If you like the content, don't forget to hit the subscribe button below. You can also follow Rain Man's Take on Instagram at Rain Man's Take. Also, check out our website at www.rainmanstakepodcast.com. and send your comments to rainmanstake@gmail.com. Keep an eye out for future podcasts, which will be coming out every Thursday at 5 p.m. West Coast time.